So we are here to interview Ms. Sarah Kelly, who is the Sustainability Program Manager here at the University of Houston. And can you state us your qualifications, stuff like that?
Sure. So I manage the Office of Sustainability at the university, and we're in charge of all of the sustainability reporting for the institution. We also manage the campus community garden. We have a student sustainability team who has different projects that they work on, which ranges from biking on campus to waste diversion to outreach and communications to the garden. And I actually started out as a student in the sustainability program and graduated. My background's in communications, so we really try to look at how we can engage people on campus and educate them about sustainability.
So can you tell us how the idea of the garden came about and what was needed to make it happen?
The idea with the garden, actually it started back in around 2008 to get it started, and they were looking at ways that they could partner with Urban Harvest in the community. So the first garden was developed in 2009, and that was all one large bed, more like you would see in a typical, agricultural setting where you have rows of different crops. That location got moved to another location because they had issues, I believe, with irrigation. And after it was moved again, they had to move it to another location, the third location, and where it currently is. And what we did there, and this was before I actually started, but we worked with Urban Harvest to build it. So you really need to have, someone who is an expert in building a garden. It's not something that the university did by themselves, but they rented equipment and they mapped everything out to make sure that it was all spaced evenly, that all the beds were the same space, and we had 15 beds there in that location. And 5 of the beds were taken away during another construction project, so we currently only have 10, but we're looking at expanding in the future years. So we do have a drip irrigation in the garden. However, it hasn't been operational for several years, so a big part of creating a garden and making sure that it's sustainable is not only thinking about the startup costs, but thinking about the cost for maintenance and who's in charge of the different areas of maintenance.
Oh, so can you tell us some examples of what is grown at the garden right now?
Sure. So right now we just planted for the summer season. So we have beans, peppers, melons, squash, cucumbers. We always have herbs in there. We typically have multiplying onions in there. And then during the other seasons, we have things like lettuces, carrots, broccoli, and we also have some pomegranate trees in one of the beds that actually just started growing, and now we have 3 pomegranate trees. So sometimes you just let nature take its course, and if something starts growing, you see what it is and see if you can get anything out of it, and try to make it happy and grow productively.
So we talked a little about maintenance. You said it's important to look at the cost. I also heard that there's a lot of student volunteers that help with the garden as well. What, other than irrigation, what are some other what are some other maintenance requirements for it?
So as a garden, it needs to be watered regularly. It needs to be in an area that gets a lot of sun. You need to be, if it's an organic garden, then you're not going to be using any pesticides or insecticides. So you're going to have to plan out, if you want to do crop rotation, that helps with the soil, and that also helps to trick pests so that they don't know where a certain plant is. And then you also have, if you want to have like a closed loop system, then you want to also consider water, where your water source is coming from. And most gardens, in my mind, they should all have composting, because you have plant material and you can use the compost in your gardens, and it's fertilizer and soil all in one. So that's another thing that you would have to maintain, is the compost pile, and depending on what kind of method you use, it would need to be turned pretty regularly. Another maintenance thing is actually the planting itself. Some plants need to be started, so having an area where you can start them either in a greenhouse or inside where you get a lot of light is something else to consider. Also, building certain things like tomato cages or trellises for beans are other maintenance things that we have in the garden.
Okay. So in the case that we wanted to implement a garden at a high school with some open green space, what would you say would be some, needs to make it successful?
I would say the biggest thing is finding someone who is going to manage it, who's going to be in charge of the program, who most likely is a staff member there at the school, because what happens is a garden gets planted, you have all these people who are interested, who want to volunteer, who want to help out, then those people leave, and then you have an overgrown garden that nobody's doing anything with. So really thinking about the long-term goals of the garden and the long-term staff support of the garden is huge for the success of the actual program. Another thing that you want to consider is your volunteer base. Where are you getting your volunteers from? So we have students on campus that we work with, but having a specific group or a specific student organization, like here we have the Metropolitan Volunteer Program, they come out and they help us all the time in the garden. They typically have a garden event once a month, and they do a lot of the big projects with us, like when we do planting or when we pull everything out for the new season, when we have compost drop-offs and we need to fill the beds, things like that. So having a pretty solid volunteer base is also really crucial. And then I would also say things. Can you repeat the question again, just so I can?
So what would be some necessities to implement the garden and have it be successful at a school?
Okay, yeah. So another thing is figuring out what is the goal of the garden. Is it that you want to be producing as much as you can? Is it that you want it to be kind of an experiment and you want to try different methods of growing things? Do you want it to be about volunteerism and getting the community involved? Or is it just for production and donation purposes? So you can have kind of a mixture of all of those things, but you need to have one thing that's like more of the clear focus, because then when you bring in other groups, sometimes they may have a different idea of what to do with the space, and then you can have conflicting priorities, and that can cause some strife with the people who are managing the garden.
Good. Just out of curiosity, so the things that you grow in the garden, what are they used for?
So first of all, everything in the garden, we use 100% organic growing methods. So you'll see with USDA organic, that doesn't necessarily mean that there were no chemical or harmful pesticides or insecticides. We do use natural methods like orange oil on some things. Right now we're doing an ant plan because we've had a lot of ants in our soil, which means that our soil isn't as healthy as it should be. So we've done soil testing to see what the pH level is, and then we've started trying different natural methods of ant mitigation, and we're testing those out to see what is the most successful. So with all of the produce that we get though in the garden, that is all donated to food pantries in mostly the 3rd Ward, but some other food pantries in other low-income areas, because a lot of the people in those low-income neighborhoods are in a food desert. So they actually not only do they, maybe they're not eating the produce, but they don't even have access to it. So that's what we do with all of the stuff that's grown in the garden on campus.
Okay. So what do you think are some social, economic, or environmental benefits of the garden?
So our garden specifically, obviously the environmental benefits are that it's all organic, and when you are using other methods and you're using these chemical insecticides and herbicides, you run the risk of those chemicals going into not only the groundwater but also running off into the Gulf and then affecting the habitats in those areas as well. And you also are harming other beneficial insects who are helping pollinate the garden. So the environmental benefits are really big, and the social obviously is the donation, the the donations that we make to the food pantry, and also getting the community involved in the garden. So we do allow the community to come out and host events there and learn how to maintain their own garden. And economically, when you empower people to learn how to grow their own food, then they're able to be self-sufficient, they're able to respect the local food community more, and hopefully go to farmers markets and support our local economy. And that goes back into the environmental aspects, because then you're not eating food that's being shipped in and has this huge carbon footprint that's associated with it. So it's all really interconnected, and I think a garden for the sustainability program, it's really our showpiece for sustainability, because it does have that interconnectedness and it's very tangible. People can see something happening in front of them.
So in your opinion, you think that the startup costs outweigh the disbenefits of a garden?
Yeah, and that's the other thing about having a successful garden started, is having a budget. If you don't have a budget to start it up, then you should maybe consider something else, like having small plants or trying to have a container garden, something that's more low maintenance, but that can still be educational and you can still get people engaged. And then as you build momentum with that, then maybe you can get some buy-in to have a budget to start a garden. And it's not, again, you have to emphasize that it's not just about the startup, it's about the maintenance of it. Because with our garden, you know, we had the startup costs associated with it, but then you have to consider how far down the line are we going to be able to support this, and do we have a regular budget coming in to support it. And we do through the sustainability budget, but it is shared with a lot of other projects on campus. So when a school's looking at that, they need to consider, you know, what are going to be the costs down the line as well.
So, in your opinion, do you think it would be positive for children to be exposed to gardening at a young age? I mean, the school we're looking at is 6 through 12, so it'd be like from 12 years old to 18.
Yeah. So we do a lot of outreach events in the garden. We'll do tours, and we have a lot of kids groups come out who are either volunteering from schools or maybe they're just doing tours. And a lot of them have never seen food grow. And as soon as they do, they get really excited about it, because who doesn't love food, right? And then, you know, their minds are working and they're like, oh, this is how it works. It clicks. It finally clicks for them. So I think it's absolutely crucial to have students at a young age understand where our food comes from and how to be more sustainable, so that down the line, when they're adults and they're teaching their children, they can show the impact of having your own garden, having your own food, having more of that local food movement. So yeah, I think it's really crucial, and I think that they are interested in it and they're really excited to learn about sustainability and organic gardening. So
I mean, that sounds great. Do you have any closing remarks or comments or?
I think what I just said summed it up pretty well. You know, I think it's important for people to get out there and try new things and learn about sustainability. And the biggest thing that we try to teach people is to question everything. If you don't know how something works, or if you don't know what kind of impact what you're doing has on the environment or has on your local community, then start asking questions and getting to the bottom of it. And that's how we're going to create some really positive change.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll conclude this.